All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know everybody's probably busy and got a lot on their plate. So just real quickly, a couple housekeeping items. Because of the large number of participants, we mute everybody. And that just cuts down on a lot of background check noise and makes it easier for everybody to hear. So if you have a question as we go through here or through the presentations, you actually have the ability within the software to ask questions, and when we wrap up, we'll save some time at the end to walk through any questions you might have. We'll also give you some contact information if you think of something after we wrap up today, and be able to follow up on anything that you might think of after we sign off. Want to introduce everybody. I'm Mike McCarty, the CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions, SafeVisitor Solutions. I spent about 8 years as a violent crime detective with the city of Nashville, Tennessee, and helped start really their domestic violence prevention division back in the early 90s. Left there and was doing a lot of consulting work, Department of Defense, Justice, and that led me to start Safe Hiring about 14 years ago, which is a background screening firm. And then SafeVisitor is a visitor management system used by schools all across the United States. Also want to introduce Dottie Davis. Dottie's the Director of Security, Fort Wayne Community Schools. This is a school system with about 30,000 students, 4,500 employees. She's got about 63 buildings she's responsible for. Prior to moving over to the school, Dottie spent 31 years with the Fort Wayne Police Department, where she retired as a deputy chief. She was director of training. She's got all kinds of training and expertise in advanced, hostage negotiations, mental health issues, family violence, and routinely travels all over the United States and even internationally presenting on family violence, domestic violence intervention and prevention. She's a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and Dottie will be talking a lot from the perspective of managing a really large school district, and implementing some of these prevention protocols that we're going to mention. Jason Russell is joining us as well. Jason started Secured Education Consultants and was recently acquired by Firestorm. Prior to that, Jason was with the Secret Service, where he was a special agent. He's been assigned both to investigations as well as protection details for current presidents and vice presidents, as well as former presidents and vice presidents. Started out as a police officer in Lansing, Michigan, before joining the Secret Service. Has worked on U.S. Marshal Fugitive Task Force, and routinely speaks at conferences around the United States on all issues surrounding emergency preparedness, active shooter response, and just really anything safety and security related. So, having said that, we've got like 50 minutes here with some question and answer time built in. The goal behind these webinars is not that we're going to solve any or all of your issues in 50 minutes, but it really is to lay kind of a toolkit out to say, here's where I need to start. This is what we need to look at, and where we need to go in terms of what we need to do for our particular schools. We use a very talented advisory board to help drive a lot of what we're doing. You can get a lot of this information off our website at SafeVisitorSolutions.com, so I'm not going to spend much time there, but what we really want to do today is to lay some groundwork about this whole conversation related to active shooter, school safety, and really try to move this discussion from kind of a reactionary discussion to a prevention mindset. Even this morning, I was on the treadmill working out before I came to work. I'm still hearing a lot of discussion in the media that's all centered around reacting. what do we do when the active shooter's in the building? How do we react to that? And what we're hoping is that we can try to push that conversation left of Bang, which is a military program that started several years ago with the Marines, a combat hunter program, which really focuses on situational awareness. And what they're talking about when they say left of Bang, just what it sounds like. Stay left of that explosion. What are things we can do to prevent a bang or being right of some kind of incidents? And so they started this Marine combat hunter program several years ago, but the idea behind it was really starting to teach a lot of things, but a lot of it was situational awareness, prevention, being able to recognize behaviors prior to an event, looking for and seeing anomalies, somebody walking in, when it's 85 degrees outside with a long jacket on or a heavy coat on, just trying to put these things together and realize that when you start to see things that are anomalies, a lot of times your intuition may trigger on that, but sometimes we've even been socially, processed to really push down a lot of our intuition. And so we really want to get this conversation moved over into the, how do you, prevent a lot of what's happening within our schools and other organizations in terms of active shooter or threat risk to the organization. And then how do you create a wider safe zone? The most recent shooting, non-school shooting at YouTube, when you look at that case, it's pretty indicative of a lot of organizations, schools and non-schools, in that their security started at the front door. And it's still what we see a lot of discussion. And I'm telling you, if the security starts at your front door, we've already ceded way too much territory. And we've got to be able to push these safe zones out a little bit further. So that's one of the things we really want to talk about today. So we want to get left of Bang. We want to talk about, getting this conversation where we see this conversation here locally in Indianapolis area where I'm at, and Dottie's north of me about 2 hours. It's been a big focus on a particular organization here in the state and a system that they've put in place. It's extremely expensive. It's about $400,000 a building. It does nothing to control access with visitors, volunteers, background checks. And so it's really saying, we're going to try to barricade the building as much as we possibly can. We'll let you get to the front door, but then we're going to try to keep you out. And so, I've seen things in the last several months, students trained to disarm active shooters, bullet-resistant backpacks, arming school employees. And I'm going to be the first one to say, nobody's saying any of these things are wrong. What we're saying is, when you really lay out a plan, where do you want to start? What do we look at first? I'm not sure that my first response would be to, I've got 5 children in public schools, and I don't think I would feel great if I got something home that said, hey, we're starting to arm every, school employee. That would actually probably scare me more than it would cause any kind of relief on my part. The last thing that I want to see is, an American history teacher having to engage an active shooter in a hallway. And I'm not saying that might not be a plausible solution in some instances, but what we want to talk about is how do we keep that active shooter or that person out of the building. And so Jason comes out of a background with the Secret Service. We've got another Secret Service administrator on our advisory board. He spent a lot of time on advance work, and I actually went to a presentation last Thursday with 2 of Jason's former colleagues out of DC with the Secret Service. And one of the things I picked up very early in this presentation was they were talking about, as the Secret Service, they have a very low threshold for threats, meaning you make a threat, somebody's going to be talking to you. And the first reaction I had to that is I leaned over to a friend of mine who's a special agent in charge of the local office, and I said, a lot of organizations, school included, have a high threshold for threats. And so I said, that is really what we're talking about right here, is how do we lower that threshold? How many times have we heard somebody say, yeah, I know that they said that, but I don't really think that I don't think they would follow through with it. They come from a good family. The reality is that we have such a high threshold for these threats outside of organizations like the Secret Service. We got to bring that threshold down. And how do we do that? And, when we talk about prevention and really focusing on the prevention aspect, we're not saying that you're not also planning for a breach, because I can guarantee you, Jason can probably talk to this here in a few minutes, they were very well prepared to deal with any kind of breach of security if anybody were to do that. But it's got to be a balanced approach, and that's really what we're saying here. Take a deep breath and really focus on, what are some things we can do better that potentially we're intervening long before a kid thinks he needs to walk into the school and, bring a gun or a weapon in to, for some kind of justice that they're perceiving that they need. Here's a couple studies I want to show you. One that came out of the FBI, really looking at about a 13-year period. You can still see business and schools top ranking too, right here. I mean, they account for what, almost 70% of active shooter incidents. We've seen several over the last year, also in places like church or a house of worship. And then, I know we've got some folks on here that aren't necessarily with a school background, but then what kind of, risk does that pose when you're talking about an open environment versus a closed environment? It's a totally different approach to how you secure those facilities. But this is probably the meat of what we're going to talk about. And so this 2017 report, you can actually Google this, grab this PDF report online if you want to read the entire report. But the FBI is really saying, after looking at this, these are not spontaneous, emotion-driven, impulsive crimes emanating from a person's immediate anger or fear. And so when we sit back and digest that and try to put it into perspective, we start to recognize that there are actually, in most of these incidents, there is a trail or history of behaviors or information prior to this event happening. Last thing I want to mention is it really mirrors, and I've talked to Dottie a lot about this. When Dottie and I both come out of a 25 plus years in the domestic violence movement here in the United States. And when I first started in Nashville in 1994 as a young detective, I can remember having administrators, prosecutors, elected officials say, you cannot prevent murder. And I said, I'm sitting here with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of case files. And the one common denominator that I'm starting to see with a lot of domestic violence cases that ended in homicide, which in Nashville was about 25 women and children a year being murdered by a husband, spouse, father. I said the common denominator is there's a whole history of violence here that escalated over a period of time. Generally, it escalated over years, not just over a 2 or 3 day or a 2 week period. So I said there's a lot of paper here where a lot of people could have intervened. The reality was, what we learned very quickly in Nashville, we formed a unit. We brought in 33 detectives, prosecutors, counselors, started working with advocacy groups within Nashville. We actually dropped the domestic murder rate by more than 50% the first year we implemented this program, and it has stayed at a 50% reduction over the first 10 years of that program, and has continued to stay at that level of a reduction. Why? Well, one of the problems is there was a whole history of violence, but nobody was connecting the dots. Nobody understood when somebody did X and Y that was actually an increase in danger, risk, or potential lethality. And I think this mirrors exactly the same conversation we're having with schools right now. We really don't understand sometimes what we're seeing, connecting the dots, and we've got to start connecting these dots if we're really going to have some impact. And we've got to get out of this reacting to a prevention mindset, early intervention, overcoming fear reporting. I was actually reading a report that had come out here recently where they'd studied 37 recent school shootings. And one of the things they said was that fear of reporting, creating a system where students can report. Parents may not know what's going on in school, but I guarantee you the kids know what's going on in school. Recognizing the behavior, got to have threat assessment teams. Who's on those teams? How do you put these together? Those are things that you're going to probably need some help outside of this 50-minute webinar. How do you develop these? What are some tools, some softwares, some analytics that can connect dots and provide some help in assessing some of this long before it becomes an active shooter? And training. It's going to take more than a one-time training event with your staff and administration. This has got to be an ongoing part of the training program. When we look at this, just some rough numbers here, 85% of school shootings involve threat signs, behaviors prior to the shooting, and 54% of mass shootings in the United States are related to domestic violence. And we've already talked about some of the prevention aspect and understanding this trail. So having laid kind of that groundwork, I'm going to kick it over to Dottie now and just really ask, hey, Dottie, you got 35 years experience in law enforcement, leading security for a large school system. Where do they start? You're sitting here with all of this stuff, media's coming at you, telling you all these things you need to do. Where does the school start?
So I think most importantly is to realize that after these serious incidents that we're seeing happening around the country, that there is a contagion effect. Today I've been dealing with several threats that because of the recent school shooting, more people are coming forward making allegations of something that they heard or saw on Snapchat or I think the big thing is to take a breath, slow down, and to investigate it thoroughly. Mike introduced that topic well by talking about threat assessment. I ask individuals at schools, what are your backgrounds in doing threat assessment? And if the answer is 0, please turn it over to the people that have that expertise. So hopefully you have built a security team at your buildings, and if not, you are partnering with local law enforcement who does have that background and knowledge to be able to investigate and determine whether or not this is a credible threat, and then where do you go from there. 85% of the time there is going to be leakage. The person who is going to cause this type of serious incident in your buildings, whether it's a school or a shopping mall or an office park, we know that that person has told somebody about it, they've posted something online, they've shared information. And again, we need to take that information and we need to figure out quickly what is the level of that threat and what procedures and steps do we need to put in place to address that issue. Seconds matter. That is why you can't take that information and sit on it. You have to immediately start making phone calls and doing a thorough investigation with people who are able to access different databases that education cannot. Law enforcement reaches out to us quite often to ask for educational records and cooperation with their investigation, and we in turn need to expect the same thing from them. When we have threat, it is up to them to help us negotiate that, or navigate that, I should say, and determine whether this is going to be a school discipline issue, whether there's going to be a criminal investigation, if there's going to be arrest, and how can we cooperatively work well together. Our buildings have got to be a welcoming place for our students and family members, but we also have to balance that with how do we make our buildings safe and secure? How do we prevent individuals who are upset and angry and want to cause problems within our buildings? How do we slow them down and how do we prevent them coming into the building? Last week I had a meeting at a very secure location. It was actually a domestic violence shelter, and I walked up to the door and I pressed the button and nobody asked me anything and the door was popped and I walked in. Now granted, I'm a female trying to enter a domestic violence shelter. Maybe they don't think that I'm a threat, but I'm usually armed with a firearm. So how do they not know? Why are they not asking questions? And I immediately reported that to the director, that there was no screening mechanism whatsoever, that piece of technology that you have has just totally been wasted because somebody didn't ask screening questions. And I think that's a very important part of our security plan, is that we train our front office staff to feel empowered, that they are empowered to ask questions, that they have the authority to refuse entrance to someone. I will tell you that most people believe that, well, they come to the door, my job is to let them in and figure out what they want. Well, if they really want to cause problems in your building, you've already allowed them entry. So we need to give them the words to ask questions, to feel as though they have the right to say, I appreciate that you want to have a visit with the principal. We don't have a scheduled meeting. Due to your demeanor at this time, we're not going to be able to allow you entry. Please leave the property or we will have to call 911. Whatever that language is, we need to give them that tool so that they feel as though they are really part of the security team, that they are not just somebody who their job is to press a release button and let somebody in, that they are part of the security team. Many buildings or many school corporations, church, whatever the group that we're speaking with today, you have more than one location. You have more than one site. And I encourage you to develop an emergency plan that is the same from one building to the next. If you're like us, we have employees that travel from building to building. We have substitutes that may work in a building for 4 hours. When they come to that building, they need to know what the emergency plan is. So it's the same in the elementary it is in the high school. The only thing would be different is where are your evacuation location or locations, where's your reunification site. But your emergency plan should not be full of signals and codes and buzzwords that people don't know what it means. Law enforcement went to plain talk years ago, because they know that when people are in a crisis situation, oftentimes that information goes out of their head. And so plain language is much more important. We don't yell that somebody's signal 62, we yell gun, so that our partners there on the scene with us know exactly what we're dealing with. And I encourage you all to consider that as well. Think about using plain language. The shooter or the individual who's an intruder that is going to cause harm knows what they look like. They know where they are. They know what they're armed with. So why would we not share that information very directly and very loudly with everyone else, so that folks can determine based on the information that they have whether or not they are evacuating or whether or not they are going to be able to deny entry and then evacuate out of secondary mode, such as a window. So speaking of that, it's important to have that conversation with people, because again, in a crisis situation, folks will revert back to what they know. They know that when they do a fire drill, they always go out door 1 or they always go out door 3. And we need to mix that up so that the next time you do a fire drill, think about building some kind of a ruse that, okay, today there's a partial building collapse, door 3 is no longer accessible. Now, which way are you going to go and how are you going to get there quickly? By doing that, it allows people to think on their feet. It also allows them to be in charge. We need to stop saying that the principal will make a determination, or the president or the owner of the company will make a determination whether or not there's an evacuation or whether or not 911 is called. We need to let all our employees know that they are empowered, that they have the right to call 911, that they have the right to evacuate the building without anyone else's permission. We know from Sandy Hook, we know from Virginia Tech, shooter took out number 1, number 2 in charge. And when that happens, if you have not trained other staff members to be in charge, folks will freeze. They won't know what to do or where to go because they're looking for someone else to give them the authority to do so. When you devise your emergency plan and you have your evacuation routes, consider not naming your hallways nicknames. Name them north, south, east, and west, so that when first responders come to your building, you're not yelling, they're down J Hall or they're down the chicken wing, or because we actually have a chicken gym at one of our schools. That's what they've nicknamed it. That means nothing. The first time they said that, I'm like, what are you talking about? But it's an auxiliary gym and they've just nicknamed it the chicken gym. So think about when you're naming your hallways and your evacuation points using north, south, east, and west, so it'll help first responders considerably. Your emergency plan is protected by law. Everybody is asking to see your emergency plan right now. After every critical incident, they want to know, How are my kids protected? What does your emergency plan look like? How are you training them? And we are protected by Indiana code not to have to release that information. You can always talk about it in generalities, but we don't provide where our evacuation locations are, or you know, where our reunification site is until that event happens. And one thing I know that Jason and Mike can both back me up on this, sometimes those sites are fluid. It depends on where that situation is happening that day. Maybe today you can't go to that location because the shooter happens to be on that end of the building. And so distance is your friend, and you have to train people to know that maybe they cannot go to that designated evacuation location, that they're actually going to another location, gaining distance. And believe me, the police will find you. And technology is our friend, so hopefully folks are carrying some device where they can get a mass notification. I think that's one of the best investments that we have made, the ability to send out a mass notification to people to let them know that a building is on lockout. Because of the fact that we have so many employees that travel to and from buildings, we do not want them returning and trying to make entry into a building that is on lockout. And we conduct a lot of lockouts every year. We're in an urban school district, so law enforcement has a lot of activity near our buildings. So that is almost a daily occurrence that we're putting buildings on lockout via some form of mass communication. Staff members should be informed of individuals who are banned from your property. You have the authority, whether you're a public corporation or not, you have the authority to send out a no trespass letter or notify a person verbally that they are no longer permitted on your property. We use Safe Hiring Solutions, and I know that we have over 300 individuals loaded into the system as an excluded party. So should they come on to a premise and they try to scan their driver's license, I will immediately get an email and a text notification that this person is on premise. And then I am able to notify the law enforcement officer who's on site, the SRO. We are able to put a plan in place. About 99% of them, to be real honest with you, are human error. Somebody meant to hit the back button or to go to dashboard, and then instead they hit deny, and then I get a notification that this individual is there. But it is still a wonderful tool to have in place to be able to say, we know this person was banned, they're not to be on property, they've received a certified letter, and therefore next step is arrest for trespass on our property. Obviously, first line of defense, which is one of the most costliest things, is your secure vestibule, so that people cannot just enter into your school and go any which way, that they are permitted into a vestibule that feeds directly into the office. And then your office staff could have tools available to them, not only the notification I just talked about, but also they could have an alert button that they could push. I would just ask you that if you have installed those type of devices in your schools, that your staff knows where that alarm or message is actually sent. Most believe it goes directly to law enforcement, and in fact, most of the time that duress button goes to the alarm company that is monitoring your buildings. And so we know there's quite a delay there. So is it better for them to pick up the phone and dial 911? Even if they're not able to say anything? Possibly. It's just something for you to consider and think about, but at least know where is that duress alarm notification being sent. Keys for your substitutes that are coming into your buildings. They are coming in and they're going into a classroom, and many of our doors require a key to lock that door. So consider issuing them a key for the day where they sign just as if they would sign for payroll, that they are issued a key and that they have to return at the end of the day and sign it back in. Now that we are hiring, we mean school corporations hiring or having a memorandum of understanding on file for SROs. Have you considered putting in gun safes in your buildings for those school resource officers for their long guns? The majority of them would be required to retreat from the school to their squad car to get their AR-15 or shotgun and bring it back into the school to engage that shooter. Otherwise, they're armed with their sidearm, and most would tell you that they would prefer to have their long gun. So is that a conversation that you have had with your law enforcement agencies that you are partnering with? Is this a shared cost? Have you identified what that gun safe may look like? Is it in a secure location? Majority probably have already had to provide that SRO an office due to the fact that they have their law enforcement database on their laptop or on their PC. So it's just one more tool for that SRO to have in the building to be able to deal with the situation at hand. And there is nothing better than having a uniformed officer with a marked squad car. So with that, I would just say that if you are partnering with law enforcement, that you consider not allowing them to wear what they call relaxed uniforms, because the first line of defense is that uniform and that marked squad car. Otherwise, it's just another adult, male or female, in the building, and people don't understand that they have the ability to ban or restrict movement from individuals coming in. I think that's about all I want to say. I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and then, if there are any questions about anything I said at the end, we can certainly address those.
Awesome. Thanks, Dottie. Well, with that, I will kick it over to Jason. Jason, you get a really unique perspective. You come out of a law enforcement, Secret Service background, a lot of time and energy when you were with the Secret Service, spending, with the advanced work and everything that goes into that. I can tell you, living here in Indiana with, Vice President being from Indiana, I see how much effort goes into every trip he makes coming back here. And a lot of that, I don't know what's going on. And you've probably done hundreds of site assessments on top of that as a business owner now. So what can you, or how can schools apply that same kind of technique to advance work, to their prevention policies? What do they need to be doing from your perspective?
And that's really kind of our site assessment process is in advance. I mean, it's really looking at a 360-degree kind of critical view of your organization to see what the weaknesses are. And advance is essentially working backwards, saying, if I wanted to attack somebody that was standing right here, how would I do it? And then figuring out how to secure that person backwards, developing, perimeters and putting features in place or whatever it might be to secure that. So the same thing can happen with a school. You have just more protectees, essentially. You have the students. So it's a matter of looking and saying, okay, what are the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities, not only in this facility, but also in our policy and procedure that would allow somebody to attack us. That's one layer, though. And really the physical security layer, one of the things that I think is important to point out, and Dottie made a ton of great points along the way, is that every single incident that we talk about is at the end of a path. There isn't one that hasn't been. They're always at the end of a path. And every strategy that you hear about for prevention afterwards on TV or from people always focuses on the end of the path. We never try to back it up any farther. And part of that kind of concept of mirroring the advanced work of the Secret Service against what we do in the schools is saying, not only did we look at physical security with the Secret Service, but we did the advanced work on concerning behaviors of individuals in the area. So we knew we had already investigated any potential threats. And like you said at the beginning, our threshold was, there was no threshold. If there was any indication that there was a threat, we went and fully investigated it to make sure that nothing was missed. And I think a lot of the things that you're seeing now with threat assessment in education come from the Secret Service. One of the projects that I think we should refer the people on the webinar to is the Safe School Initiative, which was a project done by the Secret Service and the Department of Education. And it really was kind of taking that threat assessment process that we use in investigating threats against people that we protect and applying it to education and saying, all right, if we know warning signs exist before somebody attacks a president or an elected official or a public official of any kind, is that same concept hold true with people that attack people that perform other acts of targeted violence? And we found that they do. and the behaviors are consistent. Behaviors are consistent among attackers, and that threat assessment process that you talked about is one part of that advanced work. When you think about an advance at a school, when I was doing advance for the Secret Service, it was for a very specific event. It occurred over, the course of a day or maybe even an hour, and then it was gone. But the advance work when it comes to education is ongoing, which means your event happens every day. Your protection element has to happen every single day. So it's the same kind of concept. It's just applied over a long period of time. So that site assessment is an examination of all the weaknesses. And one of the things I think, unfortunately, we miss with site assessments when we have them done is they need to be granular. The weaknesses in safety and security happen at the detail level. So it's not a matter of going through with a check sheet and saying, do we have this, do we have that? It's a matter of, like Dottie said, with your secure vestibule, how does that actually work? I think it was a fantastic point. One of the ones I rarely hear, and I do these all the time, is talking about we need to provide them with a structure of how these things actually work. How does the vestibule work? Is it just a really expensive doorbell, or do we use it actually for access control? So that's all part of that advanced concept. It's really all about building that security backwards from, I need kids to come into school safe, I need them to remain safe all day, and I need them to go home safe. I need our athletic events to be safe. I need our after-school events to be safe. And it's taking those, what you want to secure, and then backing through it. Developing perimeters, developing good, solid policy and procedure that should you not be able to prevent it, that you're able to respond to it. And you brought up the point that we practice all the time for an assassination attempt, even though they're very rare. And the reason they're very rare, and we talk about it, when you're close, the closer you are to the protected person, the less likely you are to have an incident. In other words, the incidents that happen in a protected area, when I would set it up, happen out in the outer perimeter. I would never see them. In other words, I was putting a layer in to prevent that issue from ever reaching me. And then if they breached that layer, there was another layer that would likely prevent that from getting to my protected person. And if they breached that layer, there was another layer. So the idea that we need to bring some of the concepts from the Secret Service to schools is that layered protection that comes from not only physical security, but also solid policy and procedure, good training. All those things play a role. And unfortunately, what we're going to do after the incident that happened in Santa Fe is going to be just what we've done every other time. We're going to go back to the same arguments that we've gone back to, which is we need more physical security. We need more, we need more guns. We need less guns. Whatever you feel on that argument, it's not something that's likely to be solved. And what we're missing is there is a preventative strategy. There is an actual preventative method that we could take that would bear fruit. And it's to focus on the behaviors and focus on the threat assessment piece. With that, I'll throw it back to you, Mike.
All right. Well, this may be a great time. We're kind of talking about that threat assessment. Jason, if you want to give them a little bit on the partnership that you guys have with, I believe it's the University of Alabama and the threat assessment program. If you want to give them a little bit on that.
Sure. So obviously, I'm a big believer in threat assessment. The Firestorm, the company that I'm the chief security officer, we developed a threat assessment program with the University of Alabama. Essentially what we realized was, even though people understood threat assessment, they really didn't there was no prepackaged program and no awareness programs in place to kind of provide to schools. So we created one called Bertha, Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment. Some of the key elements of threat assessment that really have to be considered, and they were brought up previously, is there has to be a central point. In other words, all the threats have to go to one person. There has to be a central point of reporting. There has to be a way to anonymously report, because kids will only report so much. I go to many schools and they're like, no, our kids communicate with us. Well, they're not communicating everything. There has to be an awareness program. In other words, we know what the warning signs are, but that doesn't mean a teacher in a classroom knows what the warning signs are. So we need to make sure that there's a training program that goes along with it. And then there needs to be a process. Now, one of the unique things we've done with the Bertha program is we've actually attached it to an artificial intelligence program. So not only is it the program in place, but it's actually attached and scrubbing and looking for additional information. And we've run some tests over the last couple months and proven that the actual artificial intelligence can go through social media posts and go through communications and can actually pick out communication from people that ended up being attackers. So, I think you're going to see more and more threat assessment programs come out. We're pretty proud of the one that we have, and it's available to schools around the country.
Great. Well, thanks, Jason. And so, we've put a lot out there in 45 minutes, but really, I think Jason hit on a couple great points. This is an ongoing process. This isn't something where you do a site assessment, implement, add layers, push your zone out, and it's over. This is an ongoing, breathing process that you're going to be working on all the time. And so it probably behooves you, even if you think you've got some great procedures in place, the site assessment by a third party is really a critical piece. I know we hosted a security camp, and as I mentioned that, I know we've got folks from all over the country today. This is something we can bring to different states and locations, but with security camp, one of the superintendents of a very large school district was telling me, we thought we did a great job. And then we actually talked to all of our employees, and what we found is we did a pretty good job in the buildings where we had students, but we were doing a poor job in any building where we did not have students. So they had become really lax in the 4 or 5 buildings that had no students in them. And so, taking a review or looking at your policies, how do you put together a threat assessment team? This is probably the area that I see few schools have actually done this, and that is creating an actual threat assessment team. But that is a foundation of anything you're really going to do. If you're going to lower that threshold, when Jason says 0 threshold in the Secret Service, if we're going to lower it from a high to a low threshold with schools, you're going to have a team and a team put together to be able to do that. What are your background checks? I hear this all the time from schools. Oh, we do volunteer background checks, or we do contractor. Well, what do you do? Oh, we do a national check. Well, what does that mean? So evaluating that process, there is no standard for what a background check is, what a background check looks like. Some of you are in states where, you may have statutes that define that. But a lot of times it'll define it for one time, before you hire, allow them in the first time. A lot can change. We're just actually adding a program called Arrest Alert. We're getting ready to test it nationwide, but we've got access to about 80% of the jails. We can actually take a population of both employees and volunteers or contractors and put them in a program where they're being real-time monitored and can get alerts in real time if they're arrested. How do you manage the flow of people coming in and out of the building? You got to have some kind of system beyond a clipboard. The non-reporting, we talked about integrated communication, training, and then looking at the hardware construction and renovations. Look at the things you can do immediately. I pull up to schools because I have children in school, and today was one of the first times I've seen adults standing out front.
Thank you.
And so really looking at some of these environmental design issues. Walked into a school last week, bushes everywhere at the front door. You couldn't even see anything. Lots of places to hide, lots of ability to buzz yourself in without anybody knowing who you were. Matter of fact, when I hit the buzzer, the guy in front of me was already starting to walk in. I just slipped right in with him and walked right in behind him. And then looking at technology, the visitor management systems, integrating with access control, You know, how are you flagging people, or, you know,
Okay.
how are you flagging expelled students that are not allowed back on the property? We've been integrating our SafeVisitor with student information systems where all of this stuff is synced together. You know, we've seen technology where it can read license plates of expelled students or people that are excluded. Yeah, they could come on with another car, but if they don't know that system is in place, chances are they'll drive their vehicle right onto the property and get real-time alerts. And so, you know, as we kind of wrap up here, I'm going to check to see if we have any questions. We're looking for, you know, organizations that might want to host, and I'm going to put my information up here. When we say host, this may just be partnering with us, and we'll bring this to your location with Security Camp. What we did is we brought together, much like we had today, experts with lots of background, and with that, the morning session kind of focuses on some of those, you know, active shooter and predictable behaviors and threat assessment, and then we break into tabletop discussions where you are actually, as you register, saying, hey, here's the 3 things that keep me up at night at my school. And you walk into that training, we've already aggregated those responses, placed them into discussions, and have somebody leading those discussions where they're conversations that are based on solutions. We've got some upcoming learning opportunities. If you want to see what a visitor management system should look like, you know, SafeVisitor is ours. Certainly we think we've got a really good visitor management system, but it was built based on a lot of the foundations we've talked about here. We've done some really unique things. We just recently integrated with the Washington State Police Watch, only software that's ever been allowed to do this. And so we're working through some other states right now where we can actually build direct integrations into the visitor management system with some of the state police databases to supplement some of the national checks that we're doing. But, you know, you can contact us for more information if you're interested, you know, in hosting or setting up a demo or getting more information on the threat assessment programs. This is how you get a hold of me, and I can direct you to whatever and wherever we need to go. Let me see what kind of questions we might have. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in here. Either that meant we covered it really well or we put everybody to sleep. I don't know. But you've got my contact information right here. Reach out to me if you think of something after we stop today. I want to thank Jason and Dottie, because I know you guys are really busy, for taking some time out of your day and jumping on this for free and sharing your expertise. And we appreciate all of you for participating. Everybody have a great day.